Hello and welcome to episode 119 of the Noclip podcast. Danny here with a very special episode, something we've not ever done before on this feed, and sort of, I guess, a byproduct of the fact that I am on a little bit of a family road trip at the moment, taking a family vacation. We've not done one in quite a while. My holidays end up always being going home to Ireland, sometimes to see people, sometimes because people are sick. It all depends. But myself, my wife, and my kid are doing the whole like American Grand Canyon, Vegas, Utah, Northern Arizona thing. So we're on the road, and I can't record any podcasts, and also I can't play any games. I'm probably not going to be playing games, and I don't like doing podcasts when I have nothing to talk about when it comes to games, because that's kind of the whole point. So I decided I was trying to come up with when I was filming the Dwarf Fortress and Choo Choo stuff. I was trying to think of like what's a cool episode to do that we've never done before. That sort of also shows off the Patreon stuff a bit. And I thought, we do these Q&As on the Patreon all the time, where basically any of the patrons can ask me anything, and I answer it, whether it's got to do with like production or marketing or the studios we've talked to or the studios we don't talk to or the projects that got cancelled or anything like that. It's kind of like open the doors up, you send the questions in, and I will answer as many of them as I can, and I won't vet them or anything. So I thought we'd do that on this one. And it is fun for the patrons because it's their questions. So their questions get talked about on the main feed. And hopefully it's fun for those of you who listen to the podcast regular, because it gives you insight into the work that we do behind the scenes. And, we talk a little bit about it on the pod, but there's a lot more going on behind the scenes usually than you kind of think. So before we get into that, I want to thank all of our incredible Battle Pass holders: James Brown, Jason Drury, Cody Krieger, Sven Huster, Forrest Pruitt, Andy Fegan, Cameron Ladd, George Sakotis, Jacob Godserve, and Tohir Tilyav. And apologies to anyone if they signed up as a Battle Pass holder in the week that I have recorded this ahead of schedule, because maybe I missed you, but apologies for that. We're going to jump straight in with some questions here. Jan Sovis asks, hey guys, here are my questions. Oh, he's done 3 questions. This is already breaking format. Number 1, will there be a Noclip Summer Jam 2.0? Number 2, any news on the Hades Blu-ray? And number 3, will you be covering Hades 2? Wink once if yes, twice if no. Especially the podcast listeners would appreciate the winking. Yes. Well, I'll do all the blinks I can. Okay, question by question. Will there be a Noclip Summer Jam 2.0? Noclip Summer Jam was something we did during the pandemic because we were all going insane and wanted to have an excuse to produce a bunch of weird videos. And that's kind of what Noclip Crew has become at this stage. So I don't know if we'll do a Summer Jam 2.0. We're definitely we have to do a funding push soon, because we have been slipping a lot the past year. So we're overdue a life raft when it comes to funding, let's say. But I don't know about Summer Jam 2.0. We've talked about doing something called Jane Jam, which is Jeremy Jane, like Jane Dev, but a game jam where everyone makes it. We've also talked about doing like a video jam, like a get people to make their own mini docs, and then we, rate them or something. I don't know. But I don't know about Summer Jam. Maybe though. We'll see. You've put it on my mind now. Any news on the Hades Blu-ray? So we had a Hades Blu-ray in production for over a year, I think this whole thing has been going on now. Massive thanks to Jean-Paul over at Supergiant for helping, for doing so much of this work. Basically all the work. All I've done is a bunch of tests and helped with menu creation and feedback and stuff like that. Rendered some videos. I guess I re-edited all the episodes. I should mention I did that. I guess that was not a small piece of work. So the news on Hades Blu-ray is we were on the second run of final versions of this Blu-ray, which is being sold by Fangamer. I almost said fandom. By Fangamer. You can go on their website and you can hit a button that'll give you an email when it goes live. And this is the Blu-ray of the entire series that we did. It's a director's cut, so it's been changed, so it now opens with the ending, which is quite cool, which I always wanted to do, which you don't get to do when you're putting the episodes out in real time. But yeah, long story short, we had multiple rounds of sort of checks, I guess, where the company making them, producing the Blu-rays, would send them to us, and then we'd do feedback on them. And there was this crazy skipping problem, which kept happening, and had nothing to do with my renders. It was a build issue. And I think we just kind of lost confidence in it. Like, I think the issue for me was, if these keep coming back with skipping to us, then what's going to happen when they go to the end user? And that kind of scared me a bit. So we are in the process of talking to a new company about that. So my hope is that now that we have the menus built and we have the files all done and we have the captions all done and everything, that it won't be as much of an issue. So watch this space. But apologies, we've been working super hard. John Paul especially has been working super hard to make this happen. So it will happen. Just bear with us a little bit longer. We wanted to make sure they weren't busted, basically. It would have been way worse. And will you be covering Hades 2? So as you know, when Hades 2 got announced, we had on the immediate statement on that, which was on our Twitter. It was the pinned tweet. It's not anymore. So we had talked to them about it. I can't say how much we've talked to any of that sort of stuff, because obviously we're super respectful of the Supergiant dudes, and I don't know if we signed any NDAs necessarily. I think we're just keeping it on the down low. And the honest answer is, right now we don't know. Will something come out after the game? Will something come out during development? I can't say, unfortunately. We're not actively filming right now, but we've left the door open, and we're sort of, we've been talking to them, checking in on them here and there. We filmed a lot with them. And the issue that we ran into, and this is not a issue of, it's not I don't know what you could think it would be an issue of, why we might not do something, or why we might not do a series and do something post release or whatever. The issue basically has come down to, how do you film a documentary about people working in their spare rooms? So, and if you watched the original Hades series, you know that so much of the life of that came from them all in the studio, sharing these moments. The last 2 episodes were hard to put together, and it was all the remote stuff. And as we're learning with the Heart Machine thing, it's very difficult to produce that type of doc and make it that sort of compelling personal story. So that's the issue. And because COVID is sort of a moving target, it also makes the question a moving target. So right now, I can't say much, but who knows? I suspect we will end up doing something on Hades 2. Just the format will depend. That's kind of where my head is. Like, we'll probably do something eventually. You know what I mean? But I can't honestly say, and I can't say anything else. I'd love to tell you more about that, because we've been chatting to them for a while about that stuff. So, but I can't. John says, from your work documenting game developers, how has your perception of what they do changed over time? Totally. I would say before Noclip, I would say the reason I started Noclip was because when I worked at GameSpot in the UK, we would interview developers, but it was mostly people on tours, on trips and stuff like that. Sometimes go to studios, but not all that often. Before GameSpot, I did my own website, and I interviewed like the Hello Games people and other devs here and there. But it wasn't until I moved to the States and I saw how, and we could like go to studios and talk to people about it there. And I was like, oh, we know nothing. Like, games journalists know nothing about this. Like, we pretend we know what the fuck this is about. Everyone's pretending. Everyone's lying, I thought. Oh, everyone's pretending that they know what games development is. Like, we don't have a fucking clue. This is a science. This is like math. You can't pretend to know how something is made by looking at the final result. If you don't understand the formula, you don't understand the process. So that's why I started Noclip, was because I wanted to learn that process and share my learnings with people as much as I can. How much have I learned? I don't know. You'd have to, I guess Stunt Derby is the ultimate test of that, but even that, like, that's Alex, doing the development on that, really. It's changed a lot. I would say these days I feel somewhat on like there's a war on two fronts or something, because I fight back a lot on the sort of perception of development that exists in the gaming zeitgeist, which is half just gamers not having all the information, half what's written about and what's popular, and that sort of creates narratives. So I find myself in a position where I quite often don't agree with anybody. Like, I think what's being reported on and what people are talking about on Reddit is storm in a teacup stuff, and then a lot of what developers and publishers are saying, like, I kind of get their perspective too, but also, maybe not. So it's kind of why it's kind of why I like the docs to sort of speak to that a bit. Like, I prefer to try and like work in this place where I'm giving people information and they can make their minds up, rather than I could have very easily turned into like a cult of personality type influencer person. Like, I kind of fought against that at the start because I thought it was a bit of a sham or a bit reductive. Like, I had an opinion show and I did that type of stuff, and like I enjoyed doing it, but at a certain stage, like, I could have leaned into that a bit, and I don't know. I don't want to be that type of presenter or internet person. I wanted the games to be front and center, basically. So that's why it's called Noclip and not just me or whatever, So yeah, I don't know, John. My perception has changed a lot, and sometimes I need to take a holiday to figure out what it's like. So maybe that's part of it. Oscar asks, what older game that not many people have played do you think more people should play for sure? I always say Cannon Fodder, because I think it's one of those games that is like, I don't know, I think it's kind of it's one of the older games that is like universally, I feel like people would get into a bit. A lot of games have like had this second life, which is weird. Like, we're now talking about like System Shock 1 a lot. Like, why we talk, like, nobody played System Shock 1. Some people played System Shock 2. But like, not many people played. It didn't have mouse look. But like, now we're all talking about System Shock 1, right? So like, all these games, Kingpin's another one. Kingpin's a game that I really like. I'm not sure if people should play Kingpin, but there's apparently a remaster coming out of that, although we've not heard about it for a while, so I'm starting to worry a little bit. So I don't know. Maybe those. There's a great game called Cannon Brawl, which came out on the Xbox 360 on XBLA, which I adored. It was made by some devs here in the Bay, and I played the shit out of it. It was like Worms mixed with StarCraft. It was like a 2D, kind of Worms 2D looking plane, but it was like a tower defense, but it was like 1v1 tower defense where you were building like chess almost, like, and then there was an economy like StarCraft, so you were like mining and then building, and you had to like fire cannons at the other base. It was awesome. To me, that game is like for sure a classic. Like, somebody will remake that game. That genre that they made, and it will be huge, I think. But for whatever reason, that game didn't. I feel like it was a little bit too early, didn't have much of a marketing push, that type of thing. So maybe that. Should do documentaries and all those. Philip asks, have you ever thought of doing docs on game consoles or hardware? This has come up, and this also comes up when people ask us about doing docs on publishers, in that, like, with game studios, we are already have to be very sensitive to the idea that we are like doing marketing for people. You know what I mean? Like, there's kind of no way around it. Like, we obviously try not to use our voice to do that, and we try to ask critical questions, and we pay for it all ourselves. But there is a sort of an assumption that like this could be used for marketing material, some more than others, let's say, than that. So we have to be really sensitive to that. So when it comes to like console manufacturers and publishers, because that's like a little bit closer to the money, it makes me feel a little bit trepidatious. And then the other issue for hardware is that there's a lot less like getting access to those people because those pipelines don't exist. Like there are PR pipelines for games dev, so there are PR people who know who the developers are, and there are spokespeople, and then sometimes they're, if it's us, for instance, they'll open up more of the studio to talk to, but you tend to not have PR people have access to like the hardware department for a company. You know what I mean? Like it kind of doesn't happen that way. They have like brand people who are very much sit between the creators there and in the same way that like you can talk to like the director of a movie, but like we're really hard to find out who the person was who made your chair that you're sitting on, So it's a little bit of that. So we're not against it. Like but like things come up, like Playdate, for instance. That would be really interesting. But would that be too marketing-y to like cover them while they're selling this, little expensive piece of kit? I don't know. You tell us. Honestly, you tell us. Like so much of this, I have to. My own opinions. I'm overly sensitive to that stuff. So sometimes people say, "Don't be so sensitive." I'm like, okay. Like, hey, cover games before they come out. Okay, and then we did the Hades series. After we did Fallout 76, slap on the wrist. That was my fault. I've talked about that a lot. That wasn't Bethesda's fault. That was my fault. The voice that I put on that thing didn't help. That game did a complete 180 in people's minds in the 3 months after that video came out. But that's still the only video that shows what they were trying to do. Shows the truth of what they were attempting to do, even if they didn't quite land on it at launch. But I have talked to Bethesda about going back and doing a proper, retrospective on 76, because that game did well. Like that game ended up having a fairly big audience that played that game for a long time and continue to. So I don't know. I think that'd be kind of funny. Go back and do the whole thing. I think that would be really funny. Logan Johnson asks, what has been the best stop on your travels to film docs this month? Alternatively, what is your favorite place you've stopped on a way to a destination for a doc? Yeah, so I just came back from a trip up to Kitsap County, up in the sort of northwestern tip of America, the Olympic Peninsula as it's known. There is a mountain there, which I believe is called Mount Olympus, which I find quite funny. I'm not sure if the Parthenon is there. A bit of Greek humor there for you. I'd kill a euro right now. Yeah, I had a lot of fun on that trip. Where did I stop off? I stopped off on Twitter. You might have seen I stopped off at like a Bigfoot shop up in Humboldt County in Northern California. That was pretty cool. It took 90 minutes for me to get over Mount Shasta, which is the mountain between us and the state of Oregon, because the snow was so bad. But I drive a Jeep, so I just kicked that thing into 4-wheel drive, and they don't ask me to put chains on or anything, which is quite nice. But I was driving like 15 miles an hour for 90 minutes up there. Did I say 90 miles an hour before? 15 miles an hour. Very slow. I think the best place we've ever visited on the way to a dock is Sedona, which is where I'm going on this road trip with my family next week. So I'm kind of excited about that. So maybe that, but yeah, I mean, the travel was like a really cool part of this whole thing. And we're trying to bring it back with the Dwarf Fortress and the Choo Choo Chaw's dock. Like I was doing a lot of drone filming. We did a lot of we went on a day trip with Taryn Adams to Seattle. I filmed a lot of like B-roll of the towns we were in. I did a lot of like learning about the cities and towns we were there. So that's going to be in there, because a big part of the Noclip docs at the start was like, we are bringing you somewhere. We went to Texas, we went to Japan, we went to Poland, and obviously COVID totally fucked all that. Totally fucked it. So, bringing that back is a big part of it. And like right now I'm talking to 2 studios in Europe about summer trips. So that's kind of where we're at. We'll see, COVID is like it's like it's like Choo Choo Charles or something like, in an open world game where you have a baddie that's kind of like always around, and or like Madame What's Her Face in Resident Evil, or the big lad in Nemesis in Resi 3, Mr. X or whatever. It's like a baddie that you're never sure if it's gonna turn up. So you're sort of like always, it's hard to plan shit because you're like, oh, hear the music, it's coming. Kieran asks, which of the studios you've interviewed so far has impressed you most? Not just in terms of game output, but ethos and everything that makes them them. If you get what I mean. I do get what you mean. I would, One of the most impressive ones was Mobius, the people who made the Outer Wilds. Because they were so young and so smart. Like, they were very smart. Like, they felt like people who went to a fancy college smart. That kind of, the intimidating, like, you're smarter than me smart. But they were also very nice. So Mobius was definitely one that sticks out. Like, oh, these are like pound for pound, like some of the smartest people. And obviously, Supergiant are like that too. But a lot of that has come from experience because they're a good deal older. Well, a good deal. Sorry, any Supergiant people watching. They're a bit older and a lot more experienced in the industry. So that's part of that. But yeah, I feel like Mobius for sure. And then in terms of like ethos, like, the Astroneer folks, I feel like, are very aware of like mental health and stuff, and a lot of that comes from their story, obviously. So probably them. And now I'm like trying to think of some of the other studios we've been to over the years. Yeah, System Era for sure. Yeah, I think that's probably it. I don't know, like in terms of a lot of places you go to, like they definitely feel like places where people go to work, Like when we did the Final Fantasy doc, those people seemed to. We were the first people who left that studio, and it was like 7:00 in the evening. You're like, oh boy, oh boy. So I don't know. Like some places definitely feel harder than others to work at. Yeah, it's hard to tell, and that's the other problem with COVID is we don't get that insight like we used to. Like when we did the Crystal Dynamics doc, the place was empty. All the people who came in. I think 80% of the people who we interviewed just came into the office for the interview. They hadn't actually, most of them had never been in the studio yet, the new studio. So it's harder we used to be able to like garner some of this like cultural stuff by osmosis, but we really don't anymore. So it's hard. Yeah, it's really hard to do that. Cormy asks, are there any plans for some stunt derby playtests at different times? I was able to join in on one playtest, but usually work during the normal time. Yeah, we probably should. I think the reason we keep it consistent is so we have the right amount of people. If we change it every week or if we have alternatives, we might split the group. You can make your own server, and if you're in the Discord, you can also obviously like ping people and jump in a chat. So, but obviously people do that. They probably only get like 3 or 4 or 5 people maybe. So, okay, it's on my list. Thank you, Corin. But that's the reason why we haven't done it so far. Lukash asks, will you create documentaries about popular tools from the past and nowadays, like idTech, Renderware, Unreal, Unity, how they evolved, how they powered or are powering game dev, Gamebryo, LitTech, Jupyter EX, and successors? Again, it's similar to the publisher hardware situation where you are sort of you're sort of like explaining why these things work good. You're not necessarily. I can see a scenario there where they don't necessarily talk about like, I don't know, what's the voice of that documentary? I guess it's explaining what the software does. So maybe you come at it from a technical way, like we did with our The Last of Us Part 1 doc, where it's mostly a technical exercise. I've always wanted to do one on Speed Tree because I think it would be very funny to do one on Speed Tree because I think it's just hilarious that there's middleware out there that just makes trees fast. Our trees are the fastest trees. You won't get trees faster than these. I've just made a little poem by accident. So yeah, I don't know. LithTech really. LithTech is the one that stands out there. I'm like, yeah, we should do something on LithTech. We should do something on Fear 1 and 2 is actually what we should do. Yeah. God, there's so many good games in the past we need to do documentaries on. Neil asks, what have been some of the key things you've learned from Stunt Derby's development so far? Any advice for those creating their first game? Get a very talented developer who does all the work. It's Alex Austin. No, I would say, I mean, I've learned a lot. I'm still definitely sort of going through the process of learning, so it's hard for me to step back right now, especially as in the moment I'm in the publishing, trying to get money part of it, which is very, very difficult. So, or maybe it's only like as difficult as your game is not easy to sign. I don't know. Like I'm still learning a lot of this stuff. It's hard putting yourself out there. I'll say that for sure. So that's part of it. But yeah, I'm learning a lot. I'm learning a lot about the marketing side of it because that's predominantly what I'm doing. And also, yeah, in terms of game dev, like Alex is very, we agree a lot on a lot of things. I don't get involved in a lot of stuff. We sometimes butt heads over stuff, and then we chew it out. And I think in those scenarios, I've learned a lot about how you don't overly design your game early. Like, he is very much no, let's just see if it's fun. If it's fun and people are playing it, then we'll keep going. And if it's not, then we'll stop. And so he was like, we need to do playtests. Like back in August, he was like, we'll see if it's good. If it's good, people will play it. And if it's, we'll know if it's shit or if it's boring. And it wasn't. And then, we've learned, like, for instance, the 100-player modes aren't that fun. They visually look really good in the we share them on Twitter and stuff. But, like, the game is really tight when you have it with 20 people. That's like 20 or 30 people. That feels really good. And the team mode, which was largely put in just to, I don't know, have it so that there wasn't just one winner and it was like a team. The team mode is the best mode by a mile. So it's turned more into less of a driving game and more of like a team game, like a Rocket League or something, where you're really coordinating. And it's very easy to coordinate. And that all came from Alex's sort of very smart, experienced methodology. So I'm learning a lot from him. I'll say that. Maybe I'm not learning from the project as much. Maybe that's a slower thing, but I'm definitely learning a lot just listening to him. And I think we're both like older guys, which means that we're, if we wanted to be, we could be quite stubborn because we're lads, so we're fairly confident, and then we're also experienced in what we do, so we're fairly assured of ourselves. So I tried as much as possible to sort of pull back on my initial reaction of giving my thoughts or feedback and just kind of listen to what he says and then take it on. And most of the time he's right. He's speaking from a place of experience. So yeah, I'm learning a lot. I haven't learned that much yet. I'm continuing to learn, and that's a big reason why I wanted to do it. And it's a big reason I wanted to start Noclip. It's the same thing. It comes from just wanting to like get better and learn and understand this whole industry and how it works more. Keith, Keith asks, are you going to do an episode where the team hang out in Ireland? We need more Patreon funding, I think, if that's gonna happen. That would be fun though. Get Frank and Jesse and Jeremy back to Ireland. Just go in and now piss up with the lads. That'd be a good laugh. John Power asks, speaking of Power, John Power. Power is the most common surname in my hometown of Waterford. So good to see a Power here. Great work so far with The Last of Us Part 1. Can't wait to see the rest of it. Go check it out right now, John. Clearly you are an early access patron. I'm sure this has come up more than once over the years, but a retrospective on Hello Games and No Man's Sky in particular would be fascinating. I'd love to hear Sean and co take on how everything went down post-launch, and I think if he was willing to open up to anybody about it, it would be Noclip. Also, ever consider doing a retrospective on the Castlevania series? The NES games ruled my life. Yeah, and then some love for Castlevania. Castlevania is definitely one of the blind spots for me. I'm just double checking who actually made the original game. Castlevania 1. I know it's a Konami thing, but I just want to. I'm guessing it's one of their internals. I was about to say Japanese studio. Did he even say? They don't even give like a little. Yeah, so that shows you how sort of. I don't know how little I know about some of this stuff or these games. So I don't know if I'm the right person to do it. That's always the problem. Directors, producers, Nagata, Matsuoka. Probably saying all these wrong. Yeah, it doesn't. I don't know. It doesn't get. I'll look into it. I feel like there must be a lot of documentaries on Castlevania. If not like people talking to the people who made it, then presumably retrospective sort of like game history things. I'll look into it. As for Hello Games, yes, we have talked to them over the years a lot. I obviously did a lot of reporting on that game prior to its release at GameSpot. The first documentary I ever made was at Hello Games about Joe Danger back in the day. Sean is, I'm guessing John is from that part of the world as well, maybe, with that name. But also Sean is from my home county, and that's kind of how we met at a Eurogamer Expo, or it wasn't even, it was something else in London when I first moved to England. We were very close to doing one during COVID, and COVID fucked it. So we had, we were very close, like the day before we were filming it or something. It all fell apart. So I would like to do that sometime again. I think that would be cool. The conditions that we had then don't exist anymore, where we were trying to do it like in the first like 6 months of after COVID came out, and it was kind of like a window where people weren't getting sick, and we had remote crews. I can't even like the I don't I've never talked about this before, but now it's been over 2 years, so I feel like it's not that big a deal. But yeah, we had a remote crew, and I was going to do remote interviews, and the remote crew in the UK were people I'd worked with a bunch in the past, so we all worked together on it. Yeah, I think actually what happened in the end was I'm pretty sure Hello Games paid the crew anyway, even though like it was our gig. We don't let the studios pay for things. Obviously, we pay for everything ourselves. But I was like, when the thing fell through, I think they felt bad, and they were like, "We'll pay your day rate." I think that's what happened. I forget. Before I even found out, I forget. But so everyone walked away going like, "Oh, that's a shame. The whole thing didn't work out. Maybe we could do it again." But it just hasn't been the right time or anything. And it's a tricky one, right? Because like at what stage do they litigate that? Like at this stage, they've kind of told the story themselves by getting out of it all. But there is a lot more that was going on. And I think the personal toll on those guys, that part of the story, and maybe I can understand if they don't want to necessarily open up that wound again a bit, but like the amount of sort of personal shit they had to go through when all that stuff was going on was pretty bad. So I'd love to do it because I think it's a great Phoenix from the Flames development story, especially as they really have just gone above and beyond on that game. It is incredible how much they've supported it. Yeah, so, you know, there are studios that we knock on their door every 9 months, and that's going to continue to be one of them. And I really like those guys, and I've known them for a long time, and I think that's a crazy story. So yeah, if they ever want to do it, we'll be the ones knocking on the door, probably. Hopefully, we'll see. I'd just be happy if someone did, but I'd be more than happy to do it, and I just want to hang out with those guys again. It's been a long time. Jazz Jackrabbit, wow, I can't believe you're here. Says, maybe a dumb question, but do you or have you ever paid people to be in your documentaries? For example, will only agree to be in the doc if they receive some compensation. No, obviously. But we will soon, I think. But I can't say what it is. But it has nothing to do with like paying somebody to be. It's like there is a game that has some actors in it that we are maybe doing a documentary on. But when you interview actors, you usually give them a performance fee, or not an appearance fee, or like a per diem or something like that. So we've obviously never paid anyone anything. We've never been paid. I'm not sure which way that would go. I don't think I'd ever want to pay a studio for us to do a documentary on them. That seems maybe less of an ethical problem and more of a business problem, maybe. But no, we never change money, and we never like that situation I told you about. I can't even remember if Hello Games actually did that or not. But even if they didn't, that type of situation, like at GameSpot, studios used to pay for flights and accommodation when we go out and do previews, and I was like, why? Like, we're CBS. We should pay for the shitty flight and the fine hotel. It's not that big a deal, and it makes it so that our hands are not covered in blood. I don't know. Maybe that's a bit dramatic. So I pushed that, and we eventually changed that, at least on the projects I worked on, that we paid for everything. And Noclip is the same. We don't, they'll often say like, oh, because it makes sense. Like, we'll go to a different part of the world, and they'll be like, oh, we have hotels that we can put you up in. And I'm like, thanks, but it's kind of like an ethical thing. We'll do it ourselves, but I appreciate it. So no, never. But like I said, we are interviewing some actors soon, and there are sort of established ways of doing things with those people. So I had to, and I didn't know about that. And then I got wind of it, and I was like, somebody mentioned it. Somebody's management basically mentioned it, and I was like, "Oh, should that also be for everyone else?" But they're not too polite, but like they didn't mention it. It's like, "Oh, okay, we'll sort everyone out if we need to do that. That's okay. Well, if that's the way things are done, then that's the way things are done." So that's the funny sort of recent answer to that question. TCBD asks, how long will game companies operate fully remotely? I work in tech, and my anecdotal impression is that the retention and dedication has gone way down. It's hard to care about a team when you only interact with your coworkers to stilted, formalized formats. Has this affected the teams you've seen working remotely? So this is in my experience of this is that there is not a one size fits all answer to it. It very much depends on the culture and probably size of the studio. So in my anecdotal impression is that smaller studios have done well, that productivity has stayed high. It's probably, maybe it was higher in a way during the pandemic when people were not really doing much else. Bigger studios, because those studios tend to try and squeeze the most out of people, and because the jobs those people have are usually a lot less creative and more perfunctory, you're sort of a smaller cog in a big machine. For sure, in those situations, I think you have seen a drop in productivity and team cohesion and culture and things like that. Because if you're working for like a big AAA dev on a like a popular shooter, let's say, and you're not being treated particularly well and you don't really care about the product, then yeah, you're going to be more checked out than somebody who's working at like an indie studio or whatever. I would also say that like the culture of those studios, as this has increased, as now like it's been 3 years, and a lot of these studios, especially ones that have grown, have a higher percentage of remote works. I think that's when you also run into a tricky problem when it comes to team cohesion and culture again. Like someone like Supergiant, which has stayed relatively the same size, is probably 80% people who have worked together for more than 15 years. They're probably not going to have as much of an issue as, say, I don't know. Well, the Heart Machine's a good example, actually. Heart Machine is like a much bigger team now, but a lot of those people are remote all around the world, and they have to put a lot of effort into making sure that there is like there are, extracurricular activities and making sure people feel connected to the project and stuff like that. So they have a harder time of that. But then if you get bigger and bigger and bigger, the problems, increase. So yeah, how long? I think the elastic band will go back, but I don't think it's going to be because of people cracking the whip or whatever. I think it's going to be, oh Jesus, a lot of wind outside. I think it's going to be more of a cultural shift that like in another year, in 2 years' time, COVID will be less of a, hopefully, knock on wood, COVID will be less of a, Mr. X hanging around about to attack you. And people will want to go work. Like we see it at Heart Machine. The people who want to go in and work, a lot of them are people, like Len, who like being around people and talking to people, and also the younger people. Because of course, they've just like entered the workforce and they want to hang out with people and have fun. Like I totally get it. I have, a wife and a kid. When I go home, I'm not bored. I have like loads of fucking fun family stuff to do. So but also I work in a studio on my own basically all the time, but even having a place to go to for work for me is super important for my mental health. Thank you to all of our patrons. So I do think there is going to be a trend back to working in studios, but I don't think it's going to come from, I mean, some studios are trying to really, force people to come in. Some of the bigger studios are, so maybe there'll be something there. But like, I think the broader cultural swap to going back to working in studios will happen slowly. And I do think then if you're a remote worker, you're going to have less of an option that you had before. Yeah, I think the thing that I hope happens is that like some of these studios, you have to do it young though. It's hard when people have kids and families because then their kids are in school or they're close to their in-laws or parents or grandparents or whatever, is to make studios in places that are like non-traditional hubs that aren't so crazy expensive. But that's getting harder and harder because like every city in America at the moment at least is super expensive. I know cost of living in Europe is high regardless of where you are, so hard to tell. There's so many factors as well, TCBD, that like, we hit a global recession. If we hit a recession or there's a squeeze on lending or, there's a lot of stuff happening at the moment with interest rates in the States, obviously those banks that went down, that all you need is a tightening of that labor market or a loosening of it rather. And then a lot of these questions become moot and people just have to find jobs to put food on the table, right? So it's always hard to tell. And Mike asked the question, could you talk about the economics of how Frank, Jeremy, and Jesse work? Do they get paid per hour, per product? I was curious, since obviously budgeting and labor are big expenses for any business. Yeah, I'll have to be a little bit sensitive around this question because obviously I'm speaking about other people's business. But anyone who works for on Noclip stuff is... So everyone's freelance, first of all, because they do other jobs. Although Jeremy hasn't really done much else except for Noclip over the past few years, largely. Jesse obviously edits videos for lots of other popular YouTubers. Frank teaches, you know what I mean? Like, not all year, but he has a teaching job, and does other stuff. He's streaming as well is a big part of his work. So everyone's a freelancer, and they have hourly rates because they largely don't work full days. They'll do 3 hours, half a day here, 3 days in a row here, whatever it is. And they invoice at the end of a month, and I always pay them within 24 hours minimum. And we have a sort of there's a range that I basically tell everyone, this is how much. We have weekly meetings about what everyone's up to, make sure everyone's got some work and something that they're working on. Sometimes we're out of sync. Frank is usually downstream from us a lot because he's capturing gameplay for stuff before we've even shot an interview. He's already captured gameplay. Like Choo Choo Charles, he had that whole game captured before I even went up to record the interview, right? Because he has to be a bit more downstream. So I have a sort of a range where they are. But yeah, to your point, labor expense is by far our biggest expense, for sure. And it used to just be me and then Jeremy doing bits and bobs, and then Jeremy's does a lot more now, and then Frank came in to help with gameplay because that was a huge thing that was slowing us down. And then Jesse came in to basically make it so that we could do the podcast all the time because I just had too much work on my hands, and now he's helping do assembly cuts of some of our docs as well, which is really cool. So yeah, it's we could pull back on a lot of that, and I could just keep a lot more of the money and make fewer documentaries. But the whole thing has always been I've pulled out my same wage and for whatever, as long as this has been 6 years, and the rest of the money, if there's less of it or more of it, goes into producing the docs. Yeah, and then we hire other people from time to time. Dan Silverstone's done a bunch of motion graphics for us. Megan Carnes did music for us and captions over the years. We've hired Dennis, my buddy in Ireland, archived everything. He did a big metadata breakdown of all of our docs. He did captions for a while too. He's done some gameplay as well. So yeah, it's just, I do all the budgeting. I'm not a business major or whatever, but I was a freelancer since I was 15. I did business economics. I didn't do accounting in high school for my leaving cert, but I did business and economics. So I have a fairly decent eye for that stuff. It comes somewhat naturally to me. So I put my business hat on a lot of the time. It's harder pitching games to publishers with the business hat than it is budgeting Noclip, let's say that. But yeah, that's basically how it works. I can't really say anything else because it's everyone's gotten at least one raise over the past, when they work as well for a while. People, I try and, within the very stringent limits of a crowdfunded business, I try and be as fair as possible to everyone. And sometimes that puts a bit more of a squeeze on us, but it's really important to me that people don't walk away from that they like what they work and they feel like they're respected, on the team. And I'd love to do more. I would love for us to have as much money, whereas we could have people on full time and produce way more docs and produce better stuff on crew and have people in the studio and all that sort of stuff. And I'm doing other business things in the background to try and make that happen. So the load isn't so much on the Patreon stuff, but. I think there's more I'm guessing there's more Patreon questions coming up. I've not looked at these ahead of time, so I'll leave it there for now. How many questions? I think we're over halfway. We're on the final stretch here, folks. Hope this has been fun. Hope you don't mind me rambling too much. It's becoming like the Jeff Gerstmann podcast, just one person talking for 3 hours. It won't be 3 hours long. Don't worry. My voice cannot cannot stand that. Jonathan asks, could you do more episodes around debut games from indie developers? I subscribe because of how incredibly useful and interesting it was to hear the struggles of a single or two-person studio trying to make their way and the struggles and victories along the way. Hearing old white men gushing about their 20 to 30-year-old studio isn't as interesting to me. I love hearing from Dennis and Jonathan from Hotline Miami, Nick Pierce's amazing story on the Forgotten City, and my favorite so far has been the insight from Lilith Walther's Bloodborne PSX. I'm really excited for the Vampire Survivors video much more than The Last of Us, not just because of the puppet. Thanks, Jonathan. Yeah, so this speaks to the many audiences we serve here on Noclip. And I think if you were to... The Last of Us and Dwarf Fortress are probably good examples of the two sort of things we have on the spectrum. Not just because of the focus of the doc in terms of the size of the studio or how old it is, but also because of the format. So there are some documentaries that take longer than others. Like the Dwarf Fortress one is very much about these people and their 20-year story and who they are as individuals and the creative process and all this sort of stuff. And then if you look at the Last of Us one, that is a design retrospective where we are talking to people about the design. We don't get into any personal stuff really at all. Maybe a little bit, but not really. It's technical, it's analytical, and it's about a game people already know. And those ones are a lot easier to produce. And I'm not saying the Last of Us one was easy to produce. It took a lot. The whole team worked on it. It took time to go down and film, and color grade, and capture the gameplay, and put a lot of thought into the effort, or thought and effort into the edit, because it is a very refined game as well. So the edit had to reflect that sort of polish. But in terms of the storytelling, it's more, technical than it is emotional, right? We have a lot of docs that are more emotional than technical, like Astroneer, for instance, is much more about the people and their story than the technical side of it. So that's one part of it. The other part that you're specifically talking about is, not talking to these sort of like established people within the industry and more talking about developers you can identify with. So we have people who mostly want big docs, and we have also got people like you who mostly want indie stuff. So we have to play this sort of like plate spinning game, right? And also like I do too, right? I don't want to just make docs on indie people, and I also don't want to make just docs on big studios. Like we'll run out of one or the other eventually. And also creatively, it's not as interesting, right? So I like spinning all the different plates, and it means we can tackle projects differently, right? So Vampire Survivors is definitely one of those. Choo Choo Charles is 100% one of those. That is the most one of those we've ever done, because this guy was 19 years old when he started it. The Dwarf Fortress documentary is another one of those. Well, they were probably 19 when they started. They were probably younger, because they're in their 40s now. When they started the Dwarf, I guess they were a bit older when they started Dwarf Fortress, but when they started making their games, they were that age for sure. I'm trying to see what else we have on the board. I don't have my glasses on right now. We have I don't think we've said this publicly yet, so I'll say it now. We're doing a documentary on Age of Empires Definitive Edition, which is a bunch of old... Actually, no, I shouldn't say that. There is a multi-ethnic group for this one. But a bunch of established people, who... And there is on The Last of Us one as well, although it is all dudes. And we do... I've talked a lot about that on Patreon and on the podcast about how we do put an effort into diversifying the cast of indie reviews we do, and not just for some perfunctory reason. If you're throwing your eyes in the air, we have done it since like the first, I think it was 6 months. I think the story I'd tell is the first 6 months of doing Noclip, we realized that we'd only interviewed dudes and mostly leads. So it was like, we need to interview people who are like the top of the project and the bottom of the project, and people who've been with the studio for a long time, and people who are just fresh. And we need to talk to people from different genders, people different sexual orientation, people different ethnic backgrounds or races. Like we need to cast as wide a net as we can to try and get as many people as possible, and not bring them in as token people, but to represent as well as we can the broader culture of the studio. And you don't necessarily get that when you talk to leads. which was an issue with The Last of Us doc where we could only talk to leads, but it was like, we have to do a technical breakdown. We have 4 interviewees and no one's in the studio. So how do you bring people in? I guess they have to have skin in the game. They have to be leads. Okay, I guess we have to do it. So every doc is like try to, you can imagine Jonathan is trying to satisfy lots of these different criteria. And one of them is, like you said, not just doing big indies or big docs, but also doing indies. So there's a good reason why we were talking about The Last of Us and Vampire Survivors in the same breath, right? Because we're trying to like show every time we talk to people about these projects that like we're not just doing one or the other, you know. So yeah, I think Dwarf Fortress and Choo Choo Charles. We've some other things in the works as well that are indie-ish. Indie triple I as well, and I mean Heart Machine is as well to a certain extent. That's kind of, I guess they're somewhat established. But yeah, thank you very much. It's a big thing, and the issue is that we're a small team, so we can only take so many swings a year. So we have to make sure we hit them as much as we can. Solar asks, there's only 6 questions left, is there? No, maybe 7. Solar asks, loved hearing about prioritizing mental health and organizing the workday in the last Q&A. Would love to hear more about that priority, how that priority began, and other steps you've taken throughout your career on that front. And then I think a second question. I love the theme of getting closer to game development that Noclip had, and it seems like that's turned into full-on let's develop games ourselves with Jane Dev and Stunt Derby. I hope it's not just a happy accident. Could you tell us more about stuff coming down the pipeline? This is just my excuse to say I love Noclip Crew. To be honest, it's my favorite YouTube channel right now. Thank you, Solar. Apologies if it's a bit quiet at the moment. Obviously, the main channel is our priority, and when I'm out of town, Crew kind of like does scream to a halt, so apologies for that. Again, if we were a big full-time crew of people, we could do this stuff, but we penny pinch on production here because we kind of have to. As for the mental health side of stuff, I mean, I grew up with OCD and depression, and have subsequently seen that I have also anxiety and depression are often quite close to each other. So there's that. I go to therapy. My wife is a mental health professional. She's not my therapist. We did not meet that way. So yeah, like mental health has always been a fairly prominent part of my life. I know like about 10, 12 years ago, it really came out in the open, which was like really cool, honestly, because it was, it was easier to talk about it, but I'm not like a new wave mental health expert or anything. I don't consider myself an expert, and I've been dealing with it my entire life before it sort of became something that people were talking about. I actually did a video on GameSpot back when Depression Quest came out, because that was like the first time I had seen games attempt to even talk about depression at all, which when you consider how much mental health comes up in games across the board these days, it's like, fairly remarkable. So I did a video back at GameSpot UK, it was my first year at GameSpot UK, about depression in games, and I interviewed a bunch of people who either play games to cope with their depression or anxiety or mental health issues or whatever. I talked to people who had written about it. Like I interviewed Lucy James at the time because she had covered it in her college. She had done, I think she did psychology. I forget. Apologies, Lucy. So yeah, it's always been, and I was working remotely and from home for 6.5 years before COVID happened. I went through the work from home thing, so I kind of had to be on top of that fairly soon. And obviously, the other thing is that like Noclip suffers if I mean, lots of things suffer. My family life suffers. You have to be. I've been in a great spot largely for a decent amount of time now. But like there are years, like if you go back and watch, I always point at the Warframe documentary. I was in a bad spot of depression then. And you can kind of see it in the edit. It's kind of morose. And editing takes a lot of mental energy, and, producing these docs and running a business does. So I have to be on top of it. If I'm not on top of it, like renting this space isn't, it's cheaper than when we were in Oakland because we're in Novato now. It's basically Sonoma County. It's a lot cheaper up here, but it's not free. So I had to justify it. And the justification is that it helps me no end having a space away from home, having a place where I can set up cameras and stuff that I can just go into the room and film this thing. I couldn't do this if I worked from home. So that's always been a priority because, yeah, everything will suffer. If I suffer, everyone who's a patron suffers too, right? Not from mental health, but from wasting their money. And I don't want that to be the case. 81 Echo asks, excluding the obvious answer of Half-Life 3, what potential game announcements do you think would generate the most hype/media buzz in 2023? I feel like since Final Fantasy VII Remake was announced, that there hasn't been anything quite on that level of excitement. 81 Echo, I'm going to give you a very depressing answer to this, and it's that it's not any games that our generation play. I think it's like Minecraft 2 or Fortnite 2 or something like that. I think it's like Dota 3. Maybe it's Counter-Strike 2, if that's a thing. Probably not. I think it's games like that. I think weirdly we are reaching saturation point with a lot of the remakes from our generation. I think once Kingpin is getting a remake, we're sort of, and I love Kingpin, but I think we're starting to scrape the barrel a little bit, and I think we're running out of that stuff. And I think what's going to happen is it's going to be Xbox 360 games maybe for a bit or something like that, but I think a lot of the more modern games. And it's funny because the guy I was talking to up in Port Angeles about Choo Choo Charles, the developer of that, you know, he grew up playing Minecraft and mobile games. He didn't play PC games. And he made that game without knowing a line of code. The guy makes it all in, he uses middlewares and Unreal Engine. And I think when I see stuff like that, I realize just the generational gap that's there. And that's where I think like a lot of the buzz is in games like that. If League of Legends 2 was announced tomorrow, or you know, whatever, like, yeah, Dota 3, I think those are the ones that would set people's minds on fire, to use an analogy that doesn't exist. Mr. Chimp asks, what are you guys' favorites to quote you from your memory on previous episode? Curl up on the sofa and play it on Steam Deck games. I asked because this subscription was the last straw that got me to buy it, and while I'm enjoying it, I've realized my Steam library is largely not curl up on sofa games. I had this exact same situation, Mr. Chimp, where I was like, I don't want to sit down and play Half-Life 2. I did enjoy Portal on Steam Deck. That was good. But no, games for me, Tinykin was definitely one. Dredge, which I talked about on the last podcast, which will be out soon. I don't know if it's out by the time this goes up. Loved Dredge. Really good. Look, game called Stunt Derby. If you get a beta key, if you're a patron, DM me on Patreon. I'll send you a key to the alpha. Shouldn't call it a beta. The alpha, and you can check that out. I'm trying to think what other ones. I talked a lot about Tinykin. I feel like there's one or two other ones. Into the Breach is very good. It's all that stuff. It's all like colorful, not first-person shooters. It's basically the criteria. Those three anyway. Into the Breach, Tinykin, Dredge. I feel like there's another. I'm going to think about it, but that's it for now. Hen asked the question, what are your thoughts around the trend of remaking video games, and does this impact the development of original games? Wow, it just kind of flowed into that question 2 questions ago. Does it impact the development of original games? We just came back from Naughty Dog, or we just filmed that thing, and that one did, because that, I think also the story of that, we didn't get into it in our doc, because I honestly didn't even think of it, and I didn't know if it was even that interesting. I think that was originally outsourced, but then they brought it in-house. So I guess you could make the argument that would have, because that came in-house and you had people working on it who were leads, that maybe that had an impact on other projects at Naughty Dog. Had to, right? But I hear I think largely what you're saying is, do you like studios making remakes instead of making original games? I would say the trend is mostly people outsourcing this work to other studios, or people with the rights to games finding studios to do it. So I don't really think it necessarily impacts development of original games. There is perhaps a paradigm in which it creates more games, because a lot of studios that do work for hire will use that work for hire to fund teams so they can work on original games. So if somebody is making a remake to a I don't know. Let's say Kingpin for whatever. If somebody got hired to do that remake of Kingpin, then maybe that keeps them bringing in money, and then they could work on something else. So I don't know. And right now there's so many games coming out. I cannot point anywhere and say this is slowing down the amount of games coming out, because there are so many games. And there are smaller AAA games at that scale because of economic issues that are nothing to do with remakes. It's just very, very hard for people to make AAA, what we now think of as like what games, the sort of quality feature set ceiling of games now requires such an enormous amount of person power, which is why you get fewer The Last of Us's and Uncharted's and Assassin's Creed's and more Hades and, you know, Weird Wests and things like that, because that's where manageable, fundable teams are. And the other ones required, you know, thousands of people. So that's kind of why. Michael asks, any chance of a Tex Murphy or Access Software doc or interview while the devs are still around at their current company? Oh, are they? Let me look that up. I love our patrons. They always let us know what's going on. Word is they're working on a remaster in their off hours in FMV games is one area Noclip hasn't really explored yet. That's true. We did. The only thing I could think of is we interviewed Zoe Quinn at GDC years ago about FMV games, but that was more of her, you know, she grew up playing 3DO games like a psychopath. So, you know, that's who better to talk about FMV games than somebody's first console was a fucking 3DO. I did not realize the Tex Murphy stuff was. Oh yeah, you can buy the complete pack, all 5 Tex Murphy games. I think Under a Killing Moon is the only one that I have any experience. I never played them. I think maybe I watched them on Giant Bomb. I forget. You can buy them all right now for $12. Oh no, you don't. That's how much you save. It costs $30. So like a tenner each mostly, or $6 for some of them. Night Diver publishing them. I was hanging out with Stephen Kick up in whatever, Oregon, or Washington, I forget. Washington, technically. 3 days ago. I bought a bunch of PC game boxes off of him. They're in the next room. So I had to go pick them up. And also hang out. But I guess Night Diver publishing that, I should ask Stephen about that. That might be a fun little thing. Thanks for the heads up, Michael. Josh LeBaugh asks, is there any trick to faster rendering in Premiere? I've asked around to see if there's a big graphics card that might be a solution. Sounds like no. I've looked into building a render farm for small operations. Sounds like a waste of money that sits dormant most of the time. Does Noclip have any tips or tricks? Going for lunch. I live 5 minutes from my office, so I do a lot of I'm just going to drive down to the office and render something. And then I leave the computer on and render. And then about 3 hours later, it's not even, it doesn't take that long. You know, an hour or two later, I say, I'm just going to go to the office and upload. And then I come, because we have shitty upload here, even though I spend $450 a month for Comcast because the stupid commercial internet, because where this building is. And then it's only 20 meg upload. And they lied to me and said I could get 200 meg up. And then I'm paying for it. And anyway, God damn it. You made me angry now, Josh. You won't like me when I'm angry about the internet speeds. So I am not a farm on the technical aspects of this, but I will tell you what I know from the top of my head. There is a connection from the amount of cores that are on your GPU to how fast rendering occurs. So the more cores you have, the better. So the graphics card can improve it, of course. And especially you need to have your GPU rendering on and all that sort of stuff. When you're doing playback, having the files on an SSD is very helpful. That is less of an issue when you're rendering, I believe. Rendering to a fast drive, though, can help. Don't render to your slowest 720 RPM drive or an external or something. Try render to your SSD. Might help a little bit. The one thing I will say is that I had, when I first started Noclip, this is me worrying about talking about money stuff. God forbid I spend money on equipment that I use. But I have to do this. When I started Noclip, I bought 2 things. I bought a camera, and which was a Sony A7S II which I was using last week I was also using our Canon, but I was using the A7S II to like film handheld with Tarn when we went to Seattle. And I bought a MacBook. And that MacBook screen died about 4 months ago. And I brought it into the Apple Store, and they said it would cost $800 to fix the cable that was getting squeezed. So I was like, well, that's annoying. No, thank you. I can still output that to a monitor, so I have like a little keyboard with a dead screen on it. I want to like snap that off the screen maybe and just have a weird keyboard, but I think much of the power of the MacBook is in the back of the screen, so I can't do that. But I needed a new laptop for when I was on shoots, and I've always thought, should I get a PC laptop? And I was like, no, but those new chips in those MacBooks are pretty good. So I got so 6 years later, so you don't think I'm just buying MacBooks like a crazy person, I did get one of those nice new MacBook Pros with the new chip in it. And that thing renders, and it upsets me how fast it renders, because it renders like, I think maybe twice as fast as my machine here, which is a decent rendering machine. It's got a decent graphics card in it. I can't remember off the top of my head which one's in it, but it's got a good one. It's not got a crazy good one, but it's got a decent one with those RTX and all that shit. It's got ray tracing on my videos. But that one, is it the A1 chip? Is that what they're called? The Mac chips? Is it? I forget what they're called. Is it A1? I forget what they're called. You know the ones. Whatever those new chips are called. Yeah, it is. It's M1. M1, yeah. So the M1 or M2. I don't know which one I have, but that helps. So the only thing I can think is if you're at a desktop, you can buy Mac, you can buy desktop Macs, but they cost like 6 or 7 or 8 grand or something, I think, for the rendery ones, the towers. So maybe don't do that. But when I was in the Mac store, the guy was like, yeah, one day I had a guy come in who just bought 2 of those and 5 screens, and it was like 40 grand or something, and he just walked out with them. And I was like, that ain't me, buddy. So you stop trying to upsell me. Only 2 more questions left. Thanks for all the questions, folks. By the way, if you want to ask me questions that I contractually have to, morally have to answer, become a patron of Noclip. It's great. Patreon.com/Noclip. And then you get to be one of the good guys. I'm gonna, instead of one of the bad people, you know what I mean? I'm gonna refresh and see if any more questions come in. One did. Good. That makes it an even 25. I'm happy about that. D Marino asks, what's the one dream studio or game you'd like to do a doc on? It's Valve. It's Half-Life. I've already done a bunch of Half-Life. We did Black Mesa. We did a Half-Life documentary. I will find new and interesting ways to do Half-Life documentaries without Valve's involvement for the rest of my life if they will not open the door to us, which they probably won't, which I get. They have their own documentary people. It's a weird studio where nobody does anything. They don't want to, so whatever. Them and Rockstar. Di Marino says, personally, I'd love to see one on Puppeteer. You're only saying that because I bought a puppet for Vampire Survivors. One of the most original, underrated games ever. I need Sony to get their act together and remaster it. God, Puppeteer. Puppeteer. What is Puppeteer? I do not remember. Oh, that thing. God, yeah. That was the Japan Studio joint. Man. Japan Studio doesn't exist anymore, so I don't think, right? Didn't they shutter? Yeah, I think so. Man. Disco Cat asks, first, did you give the puppet a name? I did not. Then, is there some super secret doc you haven't even teased in the works? There always is, Disco Cat. Always. Always, always, always. Right now, we've publicly said, I announced today about Age of Empires 2 Definitive Edition. Vampire Survivors. Wipeout. 2 people have ghosted us on that one, so that might just be a video about the music in Wipeout and the development of it from one perspective. We'll see. There is one doc we're filming next month that we have not announced yet. I did mention Choo Choo Charles or Dwarf Fortress. But there's another doc that we didn't announce that might have actors in it. Gee whiz, what could it be? Tex Murphy, I guess. Spill the beans. And then, yeah, in the summertime, there's more, like I said, talking to some European people, talking to some American people. Oh, and actually, yes, aside from that, there is 1, 2 other projects that we are working on for games that won't be out for like, one of them we've been working on for a year and a half, collecting footage for a game that won't be out for, it might never come out. Still doesn't have a publisher. So we're filming all that too. And that's, who was it earlier I was asking about? Jonathan was asking about indie developers and their struggles. In about 2 years' time, Jonathan, you're going to have a real fun one with that. And then we're also covering what I think is going to be one of the biggest AAA games in about 3 years' time from an independent studio. A real, like, wet dream collaboration that we are also recording in secretly. Some stuff. It's mostly asset collection on those. Like, we're getting the studios to collect a bunch of stuff and send it to us. So we have some of that stuff on offline drives. We now have an offline, because some of our NASAs here are on a network which could be, I guess, we turn them off all the time, but they could be, when we're using them locally, they're connected to a network. So got to be a little bit extra careful with some of that stuff. All that's on those is like rushes, like gameplay. Like, here's terabytes of gameplay. But when it's like secure stuff, it's like, oh no. So we set up a separate NAS that is locked. This building is bad. I don't think you can hear the wind, but the wind is battering this place. Finally, how are the Patreon subscriptions? Is it stable? It's not stable. Is it stable? It is stable. So our Patreon situation is that whenever we ask, there's a little bit of a jump. Sometimes. We asked last year, 2 years ago, and we had a tiny jump, which wasn't awesome. But we have very high retention on Noclip, so people stick around. But we also have high attrition. But we also have low growth. We don't add people a lot because we don't promote the Patreon a lot, and we produce small amounts of videos and lots of other reasons. We don't get front and center a lot and talk about this sort of stuff. You listen to the podcast or you're on Noclip Crew, you get an idea of us as people, but we're sort of faceless on the main channel, and people don't know that we're just a bunch of weird indie video producer people. So I think that doesn't help. But whenever we ask one of our desperate moments, which is about to come up, I think next month we're going to finally pull the plug and talk about the big tape project and try and get people to help us out again. Whenever that happens, our Patreon go up, and then it sort of slowly trickles down again month over month. So right now we're at the lowest we've been in, certainly before the pandemic. We're at like, you can go see the Patreon numbers. We're at like 4,200. When we started, after 2 months, we were at about 4,200. And we've gone as high as 6,000 around the pandemic time. But it pretty quickly comes back down again. So yeah, like I would say 2 years ago we were making 30% more revenue maybe. So, it's a problem. Not gonna lie. So the problem is though, you gotta, because of the way we operate, I've basically tried a lot of things to try and curb that, to try and give us slow growth instead of slow depreciation. The podcast is one of those. Noclip Crew is one of those. Making more docs is another one, but I would say it has slowed the bleed a decent amount. You can go to graphtreon.com, graphtreon.com. Great tool. Scrapes information off Patreon. You can look at lots of your favorite creators, patrons, and Patrons and kind of see how they're doing. You can look at our one. We stopped showing the money at a certain stage on there, but you can pretty easily figure it out by looking at the old money, where we're at any one time, how much money is coming in month over month. But we did that because it was one of the things that eventually the data suggested that if you take that off, then it encourages people. Because people might not think, they might not know how many people are employed, so they see a number and they go, well, they have enough money. That's like twice as much as what I earn every month. That's, but it's before, obviously, all of our expenses and tax and paying for, $15,000 cameras and all this sort of stuff, right? Accommodation, travel, it's all this bits and bobs. So, but you can figure it out, So yeah, so we need to get on that again soon, basically. Oh. That's some wind, man. I don't know why it's so windy today. Maybe this podcast goes up after I've been blown away. I don't know how that would happen. I guess whatever. Doesn't matter. This podcast's getting long. I need to stop rambling. Hope that answers your question, Disco Cash. So thanks to everyone who supports us, and thanks to everyone who's thinking about supporting us when they're listening to me with my puppy dog eyes right now. Last question, I think. And it's from Love Gunnarsson, which is maybe the best name or statement, name/statement I've ever heard. And there's multiple questions, so we're just going to go through them all. Love Gunnarsson asks, what do you and your team members think are the biggest struggles that a large game studios face when coming up with new original IPs for today's market? Oh boy. God, that's a big question. I'll park that one for a second. From the developer interviews, which type of department area is the hardest to get a developer to come out from to be interviewed? It's usually the most technical stuff. It's usually stuff that's hard to show visually. Or I guess it's hard to show based on what players understand, because like audio is easy to cover, and so are visuals and artificial intelligence and world building and art and things like that. I would say the harder stuff is it's funny because you're asking me basically to like talk about a part that we've sort of not been able to do. Production is a big part of games development, which is not necessarily like for like studio to studio or easy to explain. So I'd say that is definitely one of them. A lot of things with like rendering can be tricky to explain without access to the tools and being able to turn stuff off and show it. Like when that Frustrum culling video happened in Horizon, we didn't do that. That was from some Dutch TV interview where they showed the frustrum, which is basically the way the things within the camera are being rendered within the game world, and everything else is, it's just either not there or like wireframey versions of what it is. Like that's a concept that like you don't ever come across unless you see the tools. So that's a problem for sure. And then programming, like we don't do a lot of docs on like logic or like the actual craft of like how these engines are set up or how the levels are built or how a lot of stuff is now visual. People are using like Unreal is a lot of it uses nodes and stuff like that, but like actual coding like we've never said the word array on like, and I did a little coding in college, but like I don't have the vocabulary for a lot of that sort of stuff, and maybe it's hard to dive into, but I wish we did do more of that. I wish we did. I don't know how useful it would be. I know that there are game dev YouTubers out there who dive into that sort of stuff in detail, and that's cool. And there's some devs who like stream and stuff. So, but I wish we did more of that. And then what was the first question again? What do you and your team members think are the biggest struggles large game studios? I mean, it's finance. Finance is always an issue. Just finding a market that's big enough to take a risk, and that's why risk aversion is always the way. Whether you're getting VC money or money from a publisher, they want to know that there's a market for this thing, so it's hard to deviate too much, and it's harder to deviate with the bigger team you have because there's much higher risk. If a game gets delayed and there's 30 people working on it, that's different to a game getting delayed with 300 people working on it. So the burn rate of these studios is a big part of that. So you tend to, it creates an environment of risk aversion when tens of millions and hundreds of millions are getting spent. So that's probably the biggest challenge when it comes to making a new IP. But it's hard to say. It's different for every studio. An established studio might have an easier time of it or a harder time, depending on what the game they usually make is. The Madden people want to go make a hockey game or whatever. I guess they do that. That's a bad example. Right. Now these below, just two more questions. Now these below here are probably more for game developers, but at the same time, I don't know anyone else that has such a great network and talented insights like the Noclip team has. So here we go. Let's try them out. Let's do it, love. The game industry has advanced a lot with new techniques and technologies, as well as how games are being played today versus how they were 20 years ago. Do game developers feel that even development lingo language has evolved too, or has it stagnated? Too often I hear game ideas being described more like imagine that game combined with that game, but add something new to it. I would say, in my experience, that the lingo that game developers use when talking in the public, and even to us, we have to sort of shake it out at them a little bit, is different to the way they talk to each other. There is definitely like an element of code switching when it comes to, who you're talking to. So I don't think that. I think the way games are marketed and talked about in public is very different to the way games are talked about in studios. Especially the longer a project is, I think they develop their own vocabulary a lot of the time. We often have situations where we're talking to developers and they will reverse to some of that sort of stuff, and then they'll have to clarify exactly what they're talking about. But I'm not a dev, so I can't really tell. I guess technically I might be now, but I don't feel like I am, so I'll just say that. And then the last question from Love says, from my own experience, no game pitch from its original form is not the same as when the game gets released. So how often is that happening, and how is that a good thing or a bad thing? This kind of goes back to what I was talking about with Alex. Alex Austin, who's making Stunt Derby, is that like games, if your game is the same as when you pitched it, that's probably more of a bad thing than a good thing. Like if you're not understanding what your game is from making it and playing it and messing with it and you know, understanding where the fun is and what the game could be and can be, and being inspired by your game and moving in a new direction with it and chasing those dreams. Like that's every creative endeavor. Like everything anyone ever makes, I feel like, you know, maybe there are some arts that are less that way, like maybe architecture perhaps, or where there's a sort of mathematical components to creating structure that needs to be retained. Maybe that's part of it. But I think largely when you're working in a creative field, you should be adapting and changing as you're playing and understanding it. So, yeah, that's my answer for that anyway. I don't think games should. And obviously, there's the less optimistic answer, which is that sometimes games are overscoped or have ideas that the team can't get working, and then they get maybe less interesting than their original pitch. But so that's also a possibility. So I guess it can cut either way. So that's my answer, Love. Love says, I hope these questions can make some sense. English is my third. Very good, Love. Your English is better than my third language, which is probably French, maybe, is it? Je suis désolé. Okay, that's it. That's a podcast. This was I hope I'll know whether or not people enjoyed it, because people loved it. People love Gunnarsson. Was it Gunnarsson? It was, yeah. What a great name. Because I'll look at the numbers, so I'll know if anyone listened to it or not. But thank you very much. Thank you for indulging me, and thanks for all the questions for our amazing patrons over at patreon.com/noclip. If I was to freeball and answer a random question for myself, I would say we're in an interesting position here on Noclip at the moment, in that, like I said, COVID is kind of like a moving target. Also, our team's comfort with COVID is a moving target. Some of the team are sort of happier going out and filming stuff, socializing. Some of the team are less comfortable, and that has to be part of our conversation too, because like the questions about mental health mentioned, that like, you know, you have to make sure that everyone feels good and comfortable, and that's how you get the best work out of people. But also, like, we're all, you know, we're a team who's like survived this together, who have gotten through COVID, still, you know, buying groceries and paying rent together, all thanks to you. And I think there's a loyalty, you know. I think I tend to value that, and I tend to try and be loyal to the people who have stuck with me and added to Noclip. And in the same way, I feel that way to all of our patrons. I feel very thankful, and I have a generous, loyal spirit when it comes to the patrons. I hope that comes across. I feel that way. So yeah, I feel like it's a moving target. Hopefully, like, the past few months have shown that like the projects we're working on are interesting and novel and more varied than they were in the past, that we're still doing big studio stuff. Like, you don't get bigger than a studio like Naughty Dog, and we did Crystal Dynamics obviously as well. And I think you're also seeing the trickiness that we have with that, where the vibe is different than when we did Bethesda, or even stuff like the id docs at Doom, where it's very different in the world of remote, the way we have to tackle these projects. But I think the Dwarf Fortress thing is going to be like the best thing we've made in forever. I really do. I think it's super special, and I'm very excited for that. And I know we're working hard on other docs to try and make everyone from retro game fans to indie fans to AAA fans super satisfied. So we're trying our best. We're always trying our best. I hope that comes across more than anything. We're fucking trying, man. And I wish we had more support. You know, Jesse coming on, helping with the podcast, being able to make stuff on crew. You know, I can edit those crew videos pretty fast because I worked at GameSpot for years, and it's a lot easier than doing a documentary. But still, I wish we had more help. I wish we had junior editors here that could help with some of that sort of stuff, but we just don't. But I'm figuring it out. We got plenty of plans. But thank you so much for all of our patrons for supporting us. And yeah, we'll be back. I'm not sure if we're back. I don't know what the next podcast is. Like I said, this is a bit of a weird little time because I'm on this little vacation. So hopefully there's one next week. But I might not be on it. So until then, see you next time. Bye.